Today's daf, we're going to be learning Horayot, Daf Yud Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Tova and David Kestenbaum, in loving memory of Tova's father, Rabbi Dr. Israel Rivkin, Zichrono Livracha, on the occasion of his first yahrzeit, which was yesterday. My father was a pillar of strength and love for our family, passionate learner of Torah, and a man whose chesed for his community in Klal Yisrael knew no bounds. He was deeply grateful to be living in Israel, together with my mother, surrounded by generations of descendants, a dream he cherished and fulfilled with joy and pride. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy Shapiro, in memory of her mother, Dira Teichman, Sivia Bracha Bat Mordechai B'Chayei Tova, on her 12th yahrzeit. My mother was a lover of Israel and the Hebrew language. May her memory be a blessing. Today's daf is dedicated to my brother Jonathan Cohen on his 50th birthday. He's been learning daf yomi with me since Masechet Nidda of the last cycle. Looking forward to finishing with you. Okay, with that we will get started with a reminder that we have a siyum tonight. Very exciting. We're going to learn, it's a very, very short daf. I'm going to leave a little bit of today's daf for tomorrow. As you'll see, it's a very long daf, like all the other dafim. At least at the end of Horayot, we get a very short daf finally. And for anyone who can come to the siyum in Jerusalem tomorrow night, we are looking forward to seeing you there. We have a great lineup in both events. All the details for any of them, it's a little different than the old website, but it's all on the homepage. You just have to scroll down a little bit, and then you'll get to usually it used to be at the very top there where you would see it at the very beginning. In this website, it just appears, this is in general, when you look for siyums, we have our siyums up, it'll just appear on the homepage. You can also, by the way, on the menu bar, there's siyum registrations. You can always find it on the menu bar, but you can also scroll down on the homepage just a little bit, and you'll find the registration for the siyum. Okay, so tonight's on Zoom, and tomorrow we'll be live in Jerusalem and also on Zoom for anybody who wants to join from a distance. Okay, let's get started. We have a very strange daf. It's very weird ending of this Masechet, I will say, and there's a bunch of sugyot. Like people always ask me, what do you do when you get to those difficult sugyot? So today we're going to have some of them. So be prepared, right? The main thing I can say to ease us into it is, we just have to kind of take a deep breath and get ready to deal with what we're going to find. So, without more intro, we will get started. We started with the Mishnah, which talked about tadir v'sheino tadir kodem, right? Not in those words, but when you have something regular and then you have something that's less regular, the regular one always comes first. From there, we move to anyone who's more sanctified from his friend goes first, which could be actually talking about like sacrifices, items that are more sanctified, or it could be talking about people that are more sanctified, like the kohen or something like that. And the kohen gets the first aliyah that we saw in the Gemara, actually. And then the par Mashiach kodem le par ha'edah, which is which animal goes first, and that we're going to have a long list right now. We're going to start with that. So par kohen Mashiach, starting from the top of our daf, par edah, which one goes first? So now, right, it's an interesting segue into zvachim, because this sugya kind of takes us out of the, right, already our whole Masechet was a good segue into zvachim, because it's all about sacrifices and different sacrifices that you bring. And this really puts us in the eyes of the Kohen, who's going to be the main character in Masechet Zvachim, who basically stands here and he's about to bring sacrifices, and he has to choose which sacrifice goes first. So he has two in front of him. At this point, we're going to go through a list of which ones, but right now he has the par kohen mashuach, the par of the kohen gadol who makes this mistake, and remember, who just like the community, right, first he issues an erroneous ruling, then accidentally, and then he does like the erroneous ruling. And we have the par edah, we have the par, the bull offering, right? These are two bull offerings. Well, the other one is for the community. So, Minan and Mile. Where do we get this from? That the kohen gadol goes first. We have two different braitot, each bringing a different reason, one based on a verse and one based on logic, which will, in the end, also be based on a verse, but more on logic. Detanu Rabbanan, first braita. Now, when it comes to, if you remember, first in the Torah we have the par kohen Mashiach, the one of the kohen gadol. Then it says the par l'davar shel tzibur. And when it says you do that bull, it says burn it like you burn the first bull. Okay, they would burn the body of the animal. Burn it like you burnt the first bull. So what did they say? Why do you have to call it? They could have just said kasher saraf da par, and we know they were talking about the previous par, the previous bull that was mentioned. Why does it say the first? To teach you, this one goes first before anyone. This has precedence. Okay, the kohen gadol takes precedence over everything. Tanu Rabbanan. Par kohen Mashiach par edah. What if you have, same idea. Braita starts off, you have these same two ones. The bull offering of the kohen and the bull offering of the community. Par kohen Mashiach kodem le par edah b'chol ma'asav. So again, everything about that par goes first, all the things you have to do with it. Ho'il, now here's a logical reason. Ho'il Mashiach mechaper ve'edah mitkaperet. Now, in the par l'davar shel tzibur, what happens? We have a kohen, or the kohen gadol, it could be, who is the one who is providing the atonement for the tzibur. Right? They're the ones, like I said, we're now really putting ourselves into Right? The next, when we get to Zvachim, it's going to all be centered around the kohen in the temple. The kohen, or even the kohen gadol, is the one who provides the atonement for the people. So dinu she'ekdima b'chaper l'mitkaper. Wouldn't you think then the one who provides atonement is going to come first before the one who gets atonement, receives atonement? Therefore, the kohen gadol comes first. The chenu omer, and as I mentioned, this is going to be logical, but it's also based on a verse in the Torah. Chenu omer Yom Kippur. What happens on Yom Kippur? If you remember, v'chiper ba'ado ba'ad bito ba'ad kol kal Yisrael. It says the kohen atones for himself, for his family, which also means for all the other kohanim, and for all the Jewish people. So you see here the order: first himself, then the people, right? Then the kohanim, and then all the Jewish people. So there you see again the kohen comes first. Okay, now we get to the par helim davar shel tzibor kodem lepar shel avodat kochavim. What if you have the tzibor who sinned unwittingly about a regular sin and also for avodah zarah? So now, which one comes first? So they say the general one before the avodah zarah one. Why is that? My taima. Now, before I read this inside, I have to tell you, we didn't really talk about this much, but the bull offering that the tzibor brings is a sin offering. That we know, right? That's the basic sin offering. But when it comes to avodah zarah, remember you bring a par and a seir, right? Now, the seir is the sin offering, and the par, the bull, is actually a burnt offering. So now we basically have a bull offering that's a burnt offering and a bull offering that's a sin offering. The avodah zarah one is a burnt offering, and the regular one is a sin offering. So now they're going to say the reason is because hay chatat v'hay olah, because this one is a sin offering, one is a burnt offering, and the sin offering comes before the burnt offering. Now, why is that? We're going to have to see, because you would have thought a burnt offering is usually more sanctified because the whole thing gets burnt. Okay, but the truth is this sin offering also gets burnt. This one doesn't get eaten. And also, we're going to see that in general, even though a burnt offering gets burnt entirely, and the sin offering, not in this case, but in other cases, actually, usually the kohanim can eat the meat, but still, in order of precedence, the sin offering comes first. Where do we get this from? A pasuk, Vitanya. Now, where's this pasuk? This pasuk is in the sliding scale offering, which I'll remind you. Either you bring an animal, or you bring, if you're not as rich, you bring 2 birds. If you're less wealthy, you bring a mincha. Now, the 2 birds, if you remember, one is a chatat and one is an olah. One is brought as a sin offering and one is brought as a burnt offering. So now we're going to read this pasuk. There it says, "Hikriv et asher lachatat rishona." It tells you the chatat bird goes first, the sin offering. Now, matam lomar, why are they telling you this now? What do you mean, why are they telling you? You need to know which comes first, but you don't really, because there's a different verse that makes it clear which goes first. If they want to tell you the sin offering goes first, and that's why they said bring the sin offering first, it already says, and this is always tricky, already says actually in a different pasuk, okay, later, but they don't really care the order. It says in a different pasuk, the second one you bring as a burnt offering according to the rules. So, from the fact that you said this, the olah comes second, we obviously know the sin offering comes first. So why does Baba telling us the sin offering comes first? It's to build a paradigm. Don't think this is unique to this situation. Every time you have, now in this case, right, the 2 are brought together and you bring one person, you bring the sin offering first, they're a pair. But even if they're not a pair, like one person has a chatat to bring, one person has an olah to bring, so we always bring the chatat first, and that's where we learn this halacha, that the parlim davar shel tzibor comes first, because that's a sin offering, as opposed to the par for the sin offering for the avodat kochavim is, even though it's the communities, right, but it's a burnt offering. So now, v'kaimalan, and they want also teach you even farther here, afilu chatara of kodem lo olat behema. You might have thought, if you had a sin offering that's from a bird and you had a burnt offering that's of an animal, the animal is usually a more significant korban than the bird, maybe the animal burnt offering will go first, but no. This teaches you across the board, the sin offering will always go first, even if it's a bird sin offering. Okay, next case. Par avodat kochavim kodem l'seir avodat kochavim. Now, when it comes to the tzibor that follows an erroneous ruling of the court relating to avodah zarah, there's 2 korbanot, as we just said. One is the par, one is the seir. Now, what would you guess would come first? The seir, because the seir is chatat. But the Gemara actually says the opposite. So after we just established the chatat, sin offering goes before the burnt offering, and you would have thought that would be the case here, it tells you no. The bull goes before the olah, before the seir. Okay, the bull goes before the goat, so which the Gemara says, Amai, hai chatat v'hai olah. But wait, isn't the bull the Ola, so why would it go first? We just said the sin offering goes first. So we're going to have two answers to this question, both darshan from the same pasuk. Amrei b'ma'arava mishmei de Rabba Bar Meri. In Israel, they said in the name of Rabba Bar Meri, Chatat avodat kochavim chasera aleph lechatat ktiv. Okay, let's read the pasuk. It says, Im meinei aidan estalish kagad. This is for the Avodah Zarah pasuk. Vasu kol eidah. Look at the order of the pasuk. What should they do? Par ben bakar echad. Bring a bull. Le'olah, for the burnt offering. L'reach nichach la'Hashem. U'minchato v'nizko kamishpat. And the mincha and the nisachim that go along with it, ki mishpat, like the rules are, or according to the law. U'si'ir zim echad lechatat. And then you bring this goat offering lechatat. But the chatat is missing the letter aleph. So what's that coming to tell you? It's different than the other sin offerings, and it doesn't go first. That's the first drasha. Rava Amal, Kim Mishpat P'tivbe. Now, Kim Mishpat means according to its rules or its laws, and since the par is mentioned first in the pasuk, they understand Kim Mishpat to mean, even though the Mishpat is about the Nisachim and the Mincha, but the drasha is, this is according to the order it says in the pasuk, which means bull, and then sin offering, and then the goat sin offering. Okay, next, korban. Seir avodat kochavim kodem l'seir nasi. Okay, when you have a seir for the avodat kochavim, and at the same time you have a seir for the king, which one goes first? So they say the avodat kochavim one. Why is that? My time ahayt tzibor v'hay yachid. Okay, one is for an individual and one is for the community. Now this goes back to the question about the kohen gadol. He's also an individual, but again, the individual kohen gadol, if you remember, we talked about how he atones for all the people. And he's representative of the tzibor because his whole atonement is connected with the atonement of the tzibor, right? We talked about the kohen gadol. When he dies, that all the people go out of Ir Miklat. He's a character, right? A person who represents atonement for the people. So if he sins, it's almost like reflective of the people. So you've noticed he's considered more like the tzibor, but the nasi, the king, is not, is just an individual, even though obviously he also represents the tzibor, but not in terms of atonement. And therefore we're going to bring the community one first. By the way, this, again, the whole theme here is all, in general, the Masechet's all about tshuva, repentance, right, taking care of mistakes. And here, like all themes having to do with Yamim Noraim that are coming up, Tzibor Yachid is also a big theme of the Yamim Noraim, about the importance of the community. So anyway, we have another theme here connected. Seir Nasi Kodem L'Seirat Yachid. Okay, now you have the seir. Now we have two individuals. One is the king, where he brings a seir, and an individual who sins brings a seirah, female goat. So what if you have, either brings a female goat or a female sheep. We'll see that in a minute. What if you have these two seirim? One is male, one is female, one is for the nasi, and one is for the people, the individual. So obviously you're going to bring the king first, my time, ahai melech, ahai hedyo, because the king is in a different position in society. So they're obviously going to go first. You always respect the king more than you respect the individuals. Seirat yachid kodemet lekivsat yachid. Okay, now this is the only one there's going to be a machloket about, and it actually makes sense, because here these are not exactly so different. But if you have an individual who's supposed to bring a sin offering, and we have two, and one chooses to bring a goat, the female goat, and one chooses to bring the female sheep, which one goes first? So it says the goat comes before the sheep. V'hatanya, but it says in the braita, kivsat yachid kodemet l'sirat yachid. It's the opposite. It's the female sheep that comes first. Abai Tanai. Abai says the machloket tanaim, and here's the logic for each one. Mar savar sira adifa shekein drabta etzel avodat kochavi biyachid. Because also the individual who brings for avodah zarah also brings the seirah, and therefore, since we have, it appears in another situation that you bring that one must have more precedence, because avodah zarah is always more severe than everything else. So that one comes first. Umar savar kivsa adifa shekein nitrabta ba'aliyah. If you remember, the female sheep has this fatty tail that gets burnt on the altar, which is like an additional thing. So it kind of, the sacrifice has more significance because more of it gets burnt on the altar, and because of that, that would go first. So we have this debate. Okay, now we're going to finish up with a few more. Omer kodem lekevas habayimo, shte alechem kodmim lekvasim habayim mahem. Okay, so both the korban omer, which you have, you bring the day after the first day of Pesach. So they would bring this mincha offering. The main thing is the mincha offering, but they would bring it with an animal, with a keves, with a sheep. Shtei alechem is what you bring on Shavuot, right? Each of these are similar in the fact that they permit the eating of the new grains. When Shavuot permits the using them for sacrifices. Anyway, the shtei alechem come before the kvasim ba'im mahem. There's two kvasim, two sheep that you bring with the shtei alechem offering. The shtei alechem is a bread offering. So they're both types of meal offerings. they go before the animals. You would think generally animals are more significant than meal offerings, but no, they go first. Why? Is that klal? Here's the rule. Davar haba begin liyom, kodem ledavar haba begin lechem. The sheh lechem and the omer are coming. That's the sacrifice of the day, right? It's the important one for that day. The animals are only coming on account of the meal offering. The meal offerings have to be brought with the animals. So therefore, they take on precedence because it's all real. They're really the center of attention here. Okay, new Mishnah. Here comes the hard line for today. There's a few, but this is one of them. Ha'ish kodem la'isha la'chayot u'la'ashev avida. If you have a choice between, you have two people, and you're not going to be able to save them both. So what do? Which one do you save? The man comes before the woman. Okay, if you have two lost items and you can't return both of them because you just can't manage it, so if you're going to return one, return the man's and not the woman's. Okay, this is showing basically that the life of the man is more valuable than the life of the woman. Difficult line to accept, obviously. So what do I have to say about this? A few things. So first of all, a lot of the commentaries think it's because men are obligated in mitzvot more than women. Okay, because there's all these mitzvot that they have to do that women are exempt from. Because of that, their life is more valuable because life is valued in mitzvot, right? How many mitzvot can you do? It's almost like right? That's the way they view the world, as your value is based on how many mitzvot you can do. And even the woman maybe could do those mitzvot, but she's not obligated in them. Even some of them people say she can't do. Anyway, the value is a mitzvot value. That's what some people say. This reminds us of all the Gemaras that also go with, they wanted male children to be born more than female children, and they in general valued the life of men. You could connect it also with the tzibur yachid distinction, right? The men were often more public figures or did things for the community or worked out outside. The women were important in the household, which, again, not to belittle the household in the slightest. We all know how hard those women worked, schlepping the water and making the food and everything else. They've had to work much harder than we did about all those things because they had to start everything from scratch. They couldn't just turn the knob on the oven, right? Open the faucet, do the laundry by hand. Okay, they did a lot. It was very significant. But in the world at large, they looked at, okay, that's the household. But in the world outside the household, the men were more significant. All possible ways of understanding it. If right now the content this week about this topic is in Hebrew only, and Dr. Merav Shubal here, but she talks about it. Very good shiur that isn't yet up on the site, but is up on YouTube already, and it'll be up later today. But she basically says that if you look in the post-scheme, this isn't really relevant much anymore. And if you're like in a hospital and, if you're following halacha, then it really goes by whose life who is going to end up more likely to survive. And that you go by that and not by male-female. And she basically says that this over time really didn't really, I think there probably are some people who follow this halachically, but for the most part, it changed. So that also makes us feel a little bit better that this was, at a particular time. Some people say this is just talking about giving her food, and that if, you have two people you can feed, the man comes first. Not that makes it any better, really. But it also contradicts the sugya that we learned in Ketubot, that specifically you're supposed to feed the woman. Like if there's orphans, female and male, we learned this. I think it's in Ketubot. You feed the women because it's not darkasha lisha lachzor laptachim, right, for her to go to begging at doors. Like men have an easier time doing that than women, and therefore, right, the women were more at home, so they weren't really going out and knocking on doors. So it's, we have to take care of the girls because the boys can fend for themselves, basically. So there's all different interpretations here, and kind of, opens a lot of questions and not an easy sugya for us to read. Okay. There's a few more like this, but this is the male-female one. Okay, there's some other ones that are complicated. Chacham kodem lemelech Yisrael. Okay, sorry. I skipped a whole important line. Okay, I skipped a lot. Okay, let's go back. So, ish kodem l'isha l'chayot l'ashev avidan. Now, ha'isha kodem l'ish l'ksut. Now, the woman comes before the man for clothing. Here's an interesting thing. So either it's because clothing goes like food. Clothing and food are all in one category, and that goes back to what I said before about the other sugya, that she's not going to go begging for that stuff. Some people say it's for tzniut purposes, which actually often you could read that as throwing it back on the men. The men are worried about seeing the woman without clothes on, so that they should be dressed. They need clothes more than the men need clothing. That's another way. I'd rather look at it the other way, that in terms of we try to provide for them what their needs are. And apropos what's going on nowadays, unfortunately, with the hostage situation, right? They got all the women hostages out first because they were worried about rape for the women. But If they're going to rape the men as well, then the man goes before the woman. Okay, unclear why. Some people say it's because that's not the normal way of having relations. Neither is rape of a woman, so I don't have a good explanation for that. Maybe it also goes back to the previous, which is they value the men's life more than the women. Again, as difficult as that is for us to swallow. Okay, Gemara. Here comes the next complicated one. Tana Rabbanan, Hayahuva Aviv Rabo Bashevi. Okay, back to the hostage situation. We have him, yourself is in the Shevi, your hostage, your father, and your rabbi. Who goes first? So who kodem l'rabo? Okay, you have to save yourself first. That's because your brother lives with you. You have to help someone else to survive, but with you. You have to always take care of yourself first. Rabo kodem la'aviv, but your rabbi comes before your father. This is very difficult. Well, there's a Tosefta that talks about in Bava Metzia. This comes up also with Avidah, the same idea. The order of precedence, and there it says, because your father brings you into this world, and your rabbi brings you into the next world, and that's a more significant world, and therefore your rabbi takes precedence. The Safrai says it well, that it's also, this goes back to the rabbi is important for the community, as opposed to the father is important for the family. It goes back to that distinction we made before. The Mishnah in Kritut says it differently. It says it's because the father is also obligated to respect the rabbi. So since they're both obligated to respect the rabbi, it goes first. Some people say, though, that this is only if your rabbi doesn't get paid to teach you. But if your father pays the rabbi to teach you, then your father also brings you to Olam Haba, and therefore your father would go first. So that's also a good way to get around it. You see with all these things, that even though it says very clearly what the halach is, there are always ways around it. Right? People who didn't agree with it, right, kind of found excuses to get around it. Which, for me, that always sits better, that even maybe there's some complicated source, but over time, right, they kind of change their interpretation of it, even though, right, when things are pretty black and white, it seems hard to change, and you see they still change it, okay, because you can always explain it some other way, it's only in a particular situation, etc. Imo kodem l'kulam, but your mother comes before all, and that goes back to the Mishnah about the hostage situation. You always want to get the women out first. Chacham kodem l'melech Yisrael. Okay, a chacham comes before a king. Chacham shemet ein lanu kayotze bo. Now here's the reason why. There's a great answer. You can argue with this, but a chacham is much harder to replace. Okay, they're not so easily replaceable. Whereas melech Yisrael shemet kol Yisrael v'yim l'malchut. You can always put anybody to be king. It's not exactly true, but it's easier to find another king. Whereas a chacham is not as easy to replace. Melech kodem l'kohen gadol shneimar. Okay, now we're going to have all these psukim that prove. Did I skip something about the mother? No, I said about the mother. Okay. Melech kodem l'kohen gadol shneimar. Vayomer hamelech lahem k'chu imachem avdei adonichem. This is when Shlomo the king gets anointed. So the Melech says, take with you avdei adonichem. Now, who was avdei adonichem? Avdei adonichem was the kohen gadol and the navi. Okay, so what do you see here? That the king, they're called the servants of the Adon, of the king. So it seems the king comes before them. Kohen kodem l'navi, Kohen gadol kodem l'navi. The Kohen gadol comes before a prophet from the same section there. Shneimar mashachat hosham tzadok hakohen v'natan hanavi. Who comes first? The Kohen is listed first. That shows he has precedence. Right? They're darshaning all this from psukim the way they describe them. So one is they are the Adon, right? He's the Adon of them. So the king is the master. So he comes first. Then the Kohen Gadol gets listed before the Navi, so he obviously comes first. He writes Dim Tzadok L'Natan, Ve'omeo, another pasuk about it, Shmana Yoshua Kohen Gadol, Ata V'Re'echa. Okay, this is another pasuk where it says, let me just look at the whole pasuk again. It says, I'm just finding it. Shmana Yoshua Kohen Gadol, Ata V'Re'echa Yoshvim Lefanecha, Ki Anshe Mofet Hema. Okay, it says you and your friends that are sitting there because they're Anshe Mofet. Now, what is Anshe Mofet? Yachol Hadjot Tota. You maybe they were just friends. No, Talmud Lomar. Anshe Mofet Hema, Ein Mofet El Navi. So it was Yoshua Kohen Gadol and the friends that were with him that were prophets. So again, he gets mentioned first in the pasuk. Shneimar v'natan elecha oto mofet, because that's talking about a Navi. So that's how they connect with the Anshe Mofet and the Navi. Mashuach b'shemen hamishcha kodem l'merubeh b'gadim. We talked about him before. The Mashuach Melchama and the Mashuach b'shemen hamishcha is always the one who was anointed with the actual shemen hamishcha is more significant. We learned that, right? More significant than the one who wears the clothes to become the Kohen Gadol. Merubeh b'gadim kodem. So he goes first. Merubeh b'gadim kodem l'mashiach shavar machma kiriyot. Okay, but if you became, let's say you were an anointed Kohen Gadol, but you were tameh at the time because you saw Keri, you had seminal emission. Then the Merubeh B'gadim comes first because you're not functioning right now. as kohen gadol. Mashiach she'avar machmat kiliyo kodem le'avar machmat mumo. And if you're, let's say, not a kohen gadol you're a kohen gadol who stopped right now because temporarily you're impure, you take precedence over someone who stopped because they have a blemish. Now, even though a blemish also goes away at some point, but the carry is much easier to get out of. Avar, right, you just go to the mikveh and wait till nighttime. Avar machmat mumo kodem le'mashluach melchama. Okay, if you were kohen gadol, though, who got removed right now temporarily because you have a blemish, but it'll eventually get back, you're still more significant than the kohen who's mashluach melchama. Mashuach, right, who's supposed to announce before they go out to war, is the one who's in charge of that. Mashuach melchama kodem l'skan. He comes before the one who's in waiting to be the kohen gadol, because one actually has a functioning job and the other is just kind of in waiting in case something happens to the kohen gadol. Skan kodem la'amar kal. He's before the amar kal. Who is that? Gemara doesn't know either. My amar kal. What is that? Amar chista amar kula. He says everything. That's why it's called the amar kal, amar kula. It's the same letters. It's the person who's in charge of the kohanim and tells them what to do. Amar kal kodem legizbar. After him comes the treasurer. Gizbar kodem lerosh hamishmar. This is each week there was someone in charge of the family that would be in charge, that would come to work there. Rosh mishmar kodem lerosh beit av. Okay, the way it would work is every day of the 6 days of the week, not Shabbat. Everyone would work on Shabbat, I think, if that's how I remember correctly. But there was basically, for 6 days, there was a head, like there was a mishmar, which was this big family, and then within that there were smaller families. So the one for that day is obviously less significant than the one who's in charge of the whole week. Rosh Beit Av Kodem LeKohen Idiot, and he's before a regular Kohen because of that week it's his job to be in charge there, so he has more precedence over any other regular Kohen. Le'inyan Tuma. What if they have to become tamei lamet, for example? Okay, the only time a kohen can become tamei lamet is, right, either one of the 7 relatives, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a mate mitzvah. Okay, if there's a dead body that nobody's dealing with, even a kohen is allowed to become tamei. What if you have these 2 people, the mashuach melchama and a skan? Which one goes first to become tamei? Amar Mazutra B'Rav Nachman Tashma. Let's learn from here. Detan Yiskan Mashuach Melchama Shayu Malchin Baderach U'Pagah B'Meit Mitzvah. We have a braita that exactly talks about this situation. They're walking on the street. They see a meit mitzvah that nobody's dealing with. Mutav Shitamei Mashuach Melchama Va'al Yitamei Skan Shemiyera B'Psul B'Kohen Gadol Nichnas Skan U'Mishamesh Tachtav. Very logical. If something happens to the Kohen Gadol, the skan is to go in its place. So it's super important to always have a Kohen Gadol. Therefore, don't get the skan tamei because there'll be no one to take his place. Okay, this sounds very logical and good, but the problem is the Gemara is going to say, wait, they say, wait, in different places it says the Mashuach Melchama goes, and not that, right, it comes before the skan, meaning he's more important than the skan, so Mashuach Melchama shouldn't be the one. So Amar Ravina Kitanya Hila Chayoto, as if this is a very simple answer, but it really isn't simple at all. But he says when it comes to saving one of them, it's the Mashuach Melchama. When it comes to who should become impure, then the skan is more important and shouldn't become impure. Okay, that's very difficult to understand. Why make a difference? If the Mashuach Melchama is more important to keep him alive, then maybe it should be more important also not to have him tamei, so he's functioning. So the only thing that I saw that maybe made some sense out of this is that in the world of the Beit HaMikdash, Tumah is what's important there. And therefore, in that arena where the Kohen Gadol might lose his, right, might stop, and we need to put in the skan, in the realm of Tumah, we're going to go with the skan is more important. In the realm of survival, we're going to go with the one who's in charge of war, because war is to help keep people alive. So, right, it's to save people. So he's important for war, where we're trying to keep people alive, even though obviously people die in war, but that's his whole idea, right? To strengthen the people, give them the resolve to go fight and be strong. So maybe that's why when it comes to life and death, he gets precedence. That seemed logical to me, but it still doesn't really resolve the whole thing. Okay, now we have an interesting mission. The mission now is going to line up Yuchsin. Who's important where it comes to lineage, right? And lineage is going to be a very important determining factor, but only to a certain extent, and that's what's going to be surprising about this Mishnah. So lineage, we've learned about lineage before. We had a whole thing about it in Kiddushin. We're going to go back to all this lineage. I'm not going to get into all the details because it's so super long up and who everybody is, but we've dealt with this before. I'll try to do it very briefly. But Kohen, Kodem LeLevi, Levi LeYisrael, Yisrael LeMamzer, Mamzer LeNetin. Okay, the Netin is the one that people are less familiar with. That's the one from the Givonim. In the time of Yoshua, they tricked the Jewish people, and then the Jewish people made a brit with them, even though they were part of the 7 nations we were supposed to destroy. Then they kind of sort of convert. They become our Shoavei Mayim and Chotei Yitzim. They chop our trees and get water, draw water for us. That's what Yoshua tells them, because you lied to us and whatever, but you're going to work for us. But they sort of become part of the Jewish people, okay, to a certain extent. But they're converts, but they can't marry anyone right? Mamzerim and netinim also can't marry anyone except for among themselves. Netin leger. Okay, here's the next complicated part of today's daf. Why a ger comes after a netin and a mamzer is very strange. You would think a ger, first of all, when it comes to marriage, they can marry anyone except a kohen, right? A gioret can't marry a kohen. But other than that, they can marry in. It's very strange they're put in this category after the netin. Kind of a little painful, I would say, in general. Ger le'evid, we'll see in the Gemara. The Gemara gives a reason, but it still doesn't satisfy us. Ger le'evid mishuchrar. A ger comes before a freed slave, because remember, a freed slave becomes Jewish, basically. A freed slave, we're talking about Canaanite slave. Ematai. When, though? Okay, here comes the big caveat in the Mishnah. Bisman shekulam shavim. They're all equal. Okay, interesting, right? They're not equal, that's the whole point, but when other things are equal, we'll see in a minute what they mean. Aval im haya mamzer talmid chacham, kohen gadol am haaretz. Mamzer talmid chacham kodem lekohen gadol am haaretz. This is describing, obviously, the end of Bayit Sheni, which is when the Mishnayot were first started, right, around that time, when it was all corrupt, the Kohuna Gedolah, and therefore they say, if there's Kohen Gadol who's an Am Haaretz, and there's a Mamzer who's Talmid Chacham, what's the most important thing to the rabbis of the Mishnah? Learning Torah. And we're going to end our whole Masechet with the importance of learning Torah, which we've actually seen in the end of a lot of Masechet. The Talmid Chacham comes before everybody. So even though we have this whole nice hierarchy of, or I don't know, maybe not nice, because it's all just where you're born, which seems unfair, they say, well, it's overridden by being a Talmid Chacham. Okay, Gemara. Kohen Kodem Levi, how do we know this? Shneimar, quoting a pasuk in Chronicles, B'nai Amram Aharon u'Moshe, Yibadel Aharon Lakdisho Kodesh Kodeshim. Okay, he was separated out, though, to be more sanctified. So that's why he goes first. By the way, goes first for what? Right? Not so clear if we're talking about, respect and honor and all that, or we're talking about to survive. If there's only one person who's going to live, the Kohen goes first for, keeping them alive. Perhaps that's what we're talking about. Perhaps it's everything. Perhaps it's also for, tzedakah, charity. They go first. There's not enough to go around. Some people say it's talking about all those things. Okay. Anyway, it's not 100% clear. Levi kodem liYisrael shenemar ba'eta yivdil Hashem et shevet Levi. Also, they get separated out from the people, right? They have a special job to carry all the stuff of the Mishkan. Yisrael kodem lemamzer shezem yuchas v'zeino miyuchas, because he has good lineage, and the mamzer doesn't have good lineage. Right, mamzer is someone who's born from an inappropriate, forbidden sexual relationship. Zeba, okay, mamzer kodem lenetin zeba mitipak shira v'zeba mitipak psula, because the netin came from outside of our community, whereas the mamzer is a Jew, so they come first. Netin kodem leger. Here's the one that was complicated. Where did they get it from? Ze gadali manu b'kedusha v'ze lo gadali manu b'kedusha, because the netin, even though they came from a different nation, but they've been in our nation for many, many centuries. So therefore, they're still grew up within the people, whereas the ger came as an outsider. So that is why the ger is in a different place here. Ger kodem le'eved mishuchrar, zaya b'chlal haror v'ze lo haya b'chlal haror, because the eved is cursed. That comes from Canaan, when Noach, there's Canaan, his son gets cursed, right? Aror Canaan, and he will be Eved Lamo. He will be a slave. There's 3 psukim there that say about him being a slave. Aror Canaan, Eved Avadim Yel Achiv. And it says, like in 3 psukim there, that it's Aror. Ematai, Bisman Shkulam Shavim. So now we want to know where we get this whole thing about the Talmid Chacham. Minani, really, where do we get it from? Amar Rav Acha Rabbi Chanina, Amakra, Yikarai mi Pninim. It's all learned from this pasuk in Mishlei, that the Torah is more valuable than Pninim, than pearls. What do they say? How do they get from pearls to the Kohen? Well, mi Kohen Gadol shenichnas lefanai v'lifnim. Pninim lefanai v'lifnim. That's the Kohen Gadol who goes into the Kodesh Kodeshim in Yom Kippur. He is in a special place, but Yikarai mi Pninim. The Torah is even more valuable than that. Someone who learns Torah is more valuable than that, than a Kohen Gadol. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, B'dinu sheyachdim eved mishuchrar leger, shezeh gadali manu b'kedusha v'zeh lo gadali manu b'kedusha. And Eved Knani, they pass them down to their children. So the Eved Knani theoretically should have even been more than the ger, because also was brought up, if you go with the Netim, was brought up with the Jews, he was also brought up with the Jews. But El hazeh haya b'chlal haror v'zeh lo haya b'chlal haror, except that the Eved was cursed, so therefore they go down on the list. Shalu Tamidav Rabbi Lazar Bar Tzadok. This is a very strange question. And then we're going to have a whole bunch of weird questions. Why is everyone always running after chasing the female converts to marry them, but nobody's chasing the slaves, the female slaves that became the maidservants that were freed, okay, the ones who became Jewish? And they're both types of converts. Why is everyone always pursuing the Giorot and not them? Okay, I don't know, like what there seemed to be describing some reality where everyone was pursuing marrying female converts as opposed to marrying these freed soldiers. And that's why this is here, because they were viewed as people who were cursed, and therefore people didn't really want to be associating with them or marrying them. Davar acher, a different answer. Zoe taba chazkat shimur, v'zoloi taba chazkat shimur. The female slave was not planning to be freed, so she was never planning to be Jewish, so she didn't protect herself from men sleeping with her. And in general, they talk about the shvachot, that they were kind of hefker, and people treated them that way and slept around with them. But the convert was planning to convert, so she protected herself from not engaging in relations with other men. Now, this contradicts some other sugyot that talk about, that the gioret, we assume that she had relations, and that's why she can't marry a kohen, because she ends up being in the category of, technically, even though she's not a zonah, but like a zonah, because she must have slept around. So this kind of contradicts that. So you have to think about how to reconcile them. There's different possibilities, but not for today, because we really have a long daf still. Shalu Tamidav Rabbi Elazar. Okay, here's another question they asked him. Now we're getting totally off, although you'll see that it will connect back ultimately. In other words, they're asking him things about the way the world works. Okay, one was about why people are marrying, interested in marrying converts, but they're not interested in marrying these free slaves. Why do the dogs know their master and are very loyal, and cats are not at all? So Amar Laheni answers a very strange answer. Which we're going to see inside soon, which is if you eat food that a mouse ate, nibbled at, then you will forget your learning, your Torah learning. So if somebody eats mice, which is a cat, also they'll forget. Now, not the Torah they learned, but they'll forget who their master is. Causes forgetfulness. Now, people who eat things that mice nibble on, it causes forgetfulness, which is a strange thing in and of itself. We'll talk about that. But also then, someone who eats the mouse itself must forget things, and that's why the cat forgets its master, and that's why it doesn't recognize it. Shalu Tamidav Rabbi Elazar. Why are people always trying to catch mice? Like, what's so bad about mice? Like, why are they so, people hate them? Because they're bad creatures. Why are they so bad? What's so bad about them? Because they nibble even on cloaks. Okay, in other words, why is that so bad? Because they don't get any pleasure from it. I mean, obviously they get some sort of pleasure, but the assumption is it's not food that they're eating that their body enjoys. Okay, turning now to Amabet, Rav Papa Amar, Afilu Shut V'Amar Gaitze. They even chew on the handle of a hoe, and again, that's no pleasure out of that. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we get to this thing about now this is brought because we got to the cat, from there to the mouse, and before that we got to that was all from why did they marry the ger and not the gioret and not that, but also this has to do with the Talmid Chacham, and this is good advice about how to not lose your Torah and how to keep your Torah. So we're going to have 5 things. Hamishad Varim in this braita, Mishakchim et halimud, cause you to forget what you learned. Ha'ochel mimasha ochel achbar, that was the first one. Umimasha ochel chatul, things that if you eat things that a cat eats, or you eat from food that a mouse nibbled at, will help you forget your learning. Okay, why this is, we don't really know. They're just trying to maybe also discourage people from doing this. Ha'ochel lev shel be'ema, if you eat the heart of an animal. Haragil b'zeitim, if you eat olives. Okay, I don't know why, eating olives. Ha'shotem mayim shel shirei v'chitza, if you have leftover water from washing, right? In those days they would take showers. They wouldn't take showers like we do, right? They would use water, and then the water left from there, if you drink that. Harochetz raglav zo al gabe zo, if your feet are like one on top of the other when you're washing them, I guess you didn't get clean maybe that well that way. I don't know. Yesh omrim, right? It's hard to understand any of these things. Yesh omrim, afa miniach kelav tacha merosh hataf, if you sleep on your clothes. Whole debate here whether this is, by the way, people are makpid on this. Okay, this one. Not to do it. Some people say it's if you have a pillow in between or something in between, it's not an issue. It's like using it as a pillow. Some people say even if your clothes are under your pillow. Okay, so if you're the kind of person who puts your pajamas under your pillow, right? This is saying, well, make sure you take them out before you go to sleep. Okay, there's 5 things that cause you to restore your lost Torah knowledge. Pap chamim v'koshkem chamim atzmam. This is a very strange one. Well, first it's okay, but bread made on coals, and all the more so the coals themselves. Sounds like eating coals. That's very weird. Some people have a gear say it's pat chitim and the chitim themselves, and that it's talking about wheat and not about. Okay, that makes a lot more sense because otherwise it's hard to understand what eating coals is. If you eat like a hard-boiled or a soft-boiled egg without salt, some people don't have the word without salt. It's just eating hard-boiled eggs in general. Haragil b'shem and zayit. Notice that's opposite the zaitin, not the olives, but it comes from the olives, the olive oil. Haragil b'yayin u'b'samim. If you have wine and spices. Vashoteh or perfume. Hashotem mayim shel shiurei isa, as opposed to the water that was left from the rachza, from washing. This is the water left at the bottom of the, I don't know exactly what this is, but of the dough. Okay, if you eat that, that will help restore your learning. Some people say if you dip your finger in salt and eat it. So now we're going to go through these and say that this statement, this braita, supports some statements we've seen of rabbis later. This supports Rabbi Yochanan's statement. Rabbi Yochanan kshem shazayit meshakach limud shel 70 shana, kach shemen zayit meshiv limud shel 70 shana. Here he compares. Just like the olives cause learning of 70 years, again, we go back to the 70 years like we had in the story previously with Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua. 70 years a lifespan. So just like it helps forget learning of a lifespan, the Shemen Zayit actually brings back the learning of a lifespan. This helps support Rava's statement. Wine and bisamim and spices cause people to be wise. He's talking about when you dip one finger in salt, not more. And the Gemara says, Kitanai. That thing that Rish Lakish says is actually based on a machloket tanaim. He sides with one side. Rabbi Yehuda Omer achat v'lo shtayim. He says one and not two. That's Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yossi Omer shtayim v'lo shalosh. He says two and not three. V'simanech, how do you remember this? This is a bit of a weird way to remember. Kmitza. Kmitza is your ring finger. If you put down your ring finger and you hold up your finger straight, ignoring the thumb because the thumb is not a tall finger, you have one on one side and two on the other. This reminds you of the machloket. One says one and not two, and one says two and not three. Okay. Go for it, or not. Asaradvar, it's funny, like we're in the middle of a sugya about forgetting things and they give you ways to remember things. Asaradvarim kashim l'limud. There's 10 things that are hard to remember. By the way, I wanted to point out there's a book called the Sefer Zikaron, the Book of Memory, which is written up about it's a commentary on, it's from Rabbi Kanievsky, commentary on all these things about remember what's going to cause you to remember your Torah and what's not going to cause you. Much of it based on this sugya and commentary on this sugya. Okay. There's 10 things that are bad for learning, like they're hard for learning. Okay, some of these are like skulas, okay, like, superstitions. If you go under the bit of the gamal, right, that's by the mouth of the gamal, so you go under there, in other words, so if you walk under the camel completely. If you walk between two camels, or if you walk between two women, a woman who passes between two men, this is very interesting because this sounds like the woman's going to forget her Torah if she walks between two men. Looks like the woman should be learning Torah according to this because we're worried about her forgetting her Torah. There's a bad smell in the air and you walk underneath it because usually, what does it mean walking underneath? Because usually aromas, right, waft upwards. If there's a bridge that water didn't go under 40 days, I assume this has to do with water is like Torah. So if there was no Torah going by, you shouldn't go under there. Raw, like not cooked, not fully cooked bread. If you have meat you eat from like the foam at the top, foamy stuff at the top of like a pot of stew. If there was a channel. You're eating from the grease of the spoon, okay. I know the foam at the top, either which way. If there's a channel of water going through a cemetery and you drink from there, that's not good for your learning. You shouldn't look at the face of a dead body. Okay, this is not like we identify dead bodies when we need to, but they mean like really looking at it. This is an interesting one. Reading the words on a tombstone. Like, why do we have tombstones with writing if you're not supposed to read them? So the commentaries talk about difference between, I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of cemeteries, tombstones are etched in, right? They're carved out. So some people say it's just when they're sticking out rather than when they're sticking in. And then what if they're flat? There's all different ways of dealing with this because it is a little strange. Okay. Now, we're going to start a braita here. We'll see how far we get today. We're a little late already, but we're going to start this. We'll leave a little bit of today's daf for the siyum because the siyum daf is very short. But this starts our last sugya for this section, which goes into tomorrow's daf. We're going to talk about the Nasi, the Av Beit Din, and the Chacham. Okay, these were three people that the Nasi was kind of the most prominence in the yeshiva. Then there was the Av Beit Din, and then there was the Chacham, the wise one. So when the Nasi comes in, everybody stands up, and they don't sit until he says sit. So there would be like a row on either side of him that would stand up, but not everyone would stand up. and until he would sit down. Then they would sit down. There's like the wave, right? So one would stand up, sit down. The next one, stand up, sit down. As he would walk through, the people right next to him would stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. B'nei Chachamim, okay, we'll get back to this, and this is going to lead to a very interesting story, which we'll start today and finish up at the Siyum. B'nei Chachamim v'Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, so now the sons of wise men and the students of the wise people, now we're talking really about the Sanhedrin. In the Sanhedrin, you sat based on your level of learning. However, if you were the son of a Talmid Chacham or you were a student of the big prominent rabbis there, then you would also sit in front of all the other ones, even though you weren't as smart, but there was like a place saved for those people. So Bizman Sharabim Tzruchim Lahem. Now the issue is everyone would sit on the floor. So when they would need to go do something, Mafsi'in al Rasha'am, they were allowed to walk over the people, okay, which is kind of disrespectful, but they were allowed to because they had things to do for the public. Yatsa l'tzorech yikanes v'yashev b'komo. We're going to learn later that yatsa l'tzorech means if they have to go out and urinate, they're also allowed to do that, and they can even walk back over their heads to get back to their place. Because what are you going to do? You have to go to the bathroom. B'nei Talmidei Chachamim shememunim avihem parnas l'tzibur. If the sons of Talmidei Chachamim, that their fathers were important, prominent people in the community, b'zman sheyesh lam da'at lishmoa, if they could understand already the shir, nechnesim v'yotzim v'yashvim l'fnei avihem v'achoreihem klapei ha'am, they would sit right in front of their fathers with their backs to the rest of the people. But bizman she'ein lahem da'at lishmoa, but if they can't understand the shir anyway, then there's no reason to face the father because they're too young to understand. Nechnesim v'yashvim l'fnei avihem, they sit before their fathers, upneihem klapei ha'am, but they face the people. Otherwise, it's really disrespectful. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok, Omer, also at weddings, they would also be sitting in the prominent positions with their fathers. Okay, end of braita. Amar Mar. So first we're going to talk about this Yatzal Tzorech. Okay, we're going to get into bathroom issues. Yatzal Tzorech nechnas v'yashev b'mkomo. So Amar Pepelo, Amru Ela l'ktanim, aval l'gdolim lo. Urinating, yes. Defecating, no. Why? Okay, they couldn't walk on people's heads if they had to do that. Why? They should have planned in ahead of time. Okay, as we're going to see, people should always go to the bathroom in the morning at night. Why? Because then they're like in a place where there aren't a lot of people and they can go off on their side, and find a place. But if they're in the middle of the day and you're like in the shir or doing something else, you're going to have to go really far to get to the bathroom because there were no bathrooms. You have to find an outhouse, go make your own spot, but far away from everyone because of the odor. So, in order not to have to distance yourself. So these people who had to do it in the middle of the shir, they should have planned ahead and it's their fault. But nowadays the people can't control exactly like that. So I don't know what exactly this means, but people are weaker and they can't really control this. Even the kids are allowed to do this for that reason. Okay, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok, Omer, Af b'bein ha'mishteh usim otam snifim. Also in the weddings they would do this. Amarava b'chaya avihem b'fnei avihem. Only in the life of their father and in front of their father. But if their father wasn't at the wedding or their father wasn't alive anymore, you wouldn't put the kids in the prominent positions anymore. They only get that respect when their father's alive. Unless, of course, they themselves become Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, now we get to start the story. Won't get very far today, but we'll get started. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, b'yimei Rav Shimon ben Gamliel mishnei mishnah. So this whole mishnah that divided the very beginning between the way to respect the nasi, the av beitin, and the chacham, all happened in the time of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who's the son of Rabbi Gamliel that we saw the story with him in Rabbi Yeshua. So perhaps we'll come back to that tomorrow in the Siyum and connect those stories. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Nasi, Rabbi Meir Chacham, Rabbi Natan Av Beitin. Okay, those were their positions. Kiava Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Hatam Havakaime Kule Alma Mikameh. So when he was there, right, everyone would stand up. Kavo Eli Rabbi Meir Rabbi Natan Havakaime Kule Alma Mikamayu. Everyone would stand up in the same way for the three of them. Well, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel didn't like this. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Lobai Lumei Der Hekera Ben Dilila Ditu. Don't we have to have a distinction that I'm the Nasi and they're below me? We're all getting respected in the same way. So what did he do? Takin Hamanita. He instituted this Mishnah. That would have been okay, but what did he do? He did it on a day. They weren't in the Beit Midrash when he made this takana. They didn't know anything about it. The next day, they come into the Beit Midrash. You see everybody standing, not in the way they always stood before. Amru Mai Hai. They said, "What's going on here?" Amru Lahu. They said to them, "Hachi Takim Rabbi Shimon Gamliel." Yesterday, when you guys weren't here, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel instituted this takana. Amar le Rabbi Meir le Rabbi Natan. So Rabbi Meir got very angry and said to Rabbi Natan, "Listen, Ana chacham va'at av beitin not kimilta kila didan." He says, "Listen, I'm a chacham, you're the av beitin. This is disrespectful what he did to us. Let's get him back." Okay, very hard to imagine. Rabbi Meir is, taking revenge. Mine avile, what should we do? Nemale gali uktzin delele. We'll say to him tomorrow, teach us uktzin. because he doesn't know uktzin. Okay? He doesn't know it at all. That it's the last Masechet in Shas. Kevin de lo gamir ne'emar le, and as soon as we see he doesn't know it, we'll say, Miyam alel gvurat Hashem yashmiya kol tilato. We'll quote this pasuk. Who can say the greatness of God? Right? Whoever knows everything, right? The one who says the greatness of God, yashmiya kol tilato, will say all of His glory. Now, we'll say, Lamina elam alel gvurat Hashem. Who's the one who should basically talk to gvurat Hashem, give the drasha and the beit midrash? Mishi yachol lashmiya kol tilotav. And you don't know lashmiya kol tilotav because you don't know uktzin. We'll kick him out. Well, and then have ana av beitin. I'll move up to your position, va'at nasi, and you'll move up to the next position. You'll be the nasi. Shamina Rabbi Yaakov ben Karshi. Now Rabbi Yaakov ben Karshi heard what they were saying. Amar dilma chas v'shalom atimot lidei kisufei. So that's going to be really humiliating for Moshe ben Gamliel. Azal yativ achorei elita de Rabbi Moshe ben Gamliel. So what did he do? He sat right behind him in the beit midrash. Pashit garis v'tana. So he starts learning Masechet Uktzin out loud and learning it. Amar, so Rabbi Moshe ben Gamliel hears this. He says, "My dekama dilma chas v'shalom ika beit midrash amidi." He says, "This is weird. Why is he learning Masechet Uktzin? Nobody learns Masechet Uktzin. There must be something going on here." Maybe also he understood he had done something wrong, and maybe someone was going to go out to avenge what he did. So he paid attention and he learned it. He said, "Okay, this obviously I need this for some reason." Next day they said, "Bring him and let's him teach uktzin." Patach va'amal. So he started teaching it. Batar du'ukim amar lehu. After that, he said to them, "Ilo gemirna kasiftu ninon." If not, you would have embarrassed, you would have humiliated me. Pakid va'afkinu mi beit midrasha, and he kicked them out of the beit midrash. Right, their whole goal was to kick him out. They now kick them out of the beit midrash. We're going to stop here and hear how the story continues tomorrow or tonight at the Siyum, and for those who come tomorrow in Jerusalem. And very interesting story. We're going to have a lot to say about it. Okay, so our whole daf is very interesting daf to end the Masechet, all about comparing the value of different people, who goes first, who comes first, what korban, what people, to survive, right, for living, for respect, for all sorts of things, and things that trump that, like all sorts of issues, like worried about a woman getting raped, worried about, Talmid Chacham is going to come first, which again builds up to the whole thing about the importance of Talmid Chacham. And then we end with this story, which is obviously self-critical of what was going on in the Beit Midrash, which reminds us a bit of the story of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel, so perhaps we'll all connect those stories. And with that, we'll finish for today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all at the Siyum.